What if I told you that everything you thought you knew about life, death, and the spiritual world was only a fraction of the truth? Imagine dying, crossing over to the other side, only to come face to face with Jesus himself. What he revealed to me left me shaken to my core. It wasn't just a vision. It wasn't just a dream. It was a divine truth that has been hidden for centuries. And now, for the first time, I'm going to share it with you. This is not a story you can afford to ignore. What Jesus revealed about Black people, about their spiritual power, their divine connection, and the forces that have worked to suppress their truth, will completely change the way you see the world. This revelation goes beyond history. It's a spiritual battle that has been raging for centuries, and we are living in the time where the truth is finally being brought to light. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what I am about to tell you will challenge everything you've ever believed. And before we begin, let me ask you something. Are you truly prepared to hear the truth? Are you ready to receive what has been hidden for generations? If so, don't just watch. Be part of this awakening. Subscribe now, because most people who watch these videos are not subscribed, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. The moment everything changed. There are moments in life when the veil between this world and the next is lifted, revealing truths so profound that they reshape everything we thought we knew. For Jessica, that moment came in the most unexpected way. She died. But what happened next wasn't just an experience. It was a divine revelation, one that would forever alter her understanding of life, death, and an astonishing truth about Black people that the world had long ignored. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary day. Jessica went through her usual routine, waking up, making coffee, heading to work. But something felt different, though she couldn't quite place it. The air was heavy, as if charged with something unseen. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp pain gripped her chest. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before, intense, crushing, terrifying. Her breath shortened, her vision blurred, and suddenly, everything slowed down. The last thing she remembered was a distant sound of sirens before the darkness consumed her. When she opened her eyes, she wasn't in the hospital. She wasn't in pain. In fact, she wasn't even in her body anymore. She was floating above it, detached from everything earthly. Below, she could see paramedics rushing, a woman crying, people gathered in shock. But she felt nothing, no fear, no pain, no anxiety. She was weightless, free. That's when she realized she had died. A force began pulling her upward, a presence, gentle yet undeniable, guiding her beyond the physical world. And then it appeared, a tunnel of light. It wasn't just bright. It was alive, pulsing with warmth, with love, with something far greater than human understanding. She moved toward it effortlessly, as if being drawn in, and as she crossed over, she felt the presence of something, someone, waiting for her on the other side. That's when she saw him, Jesus. His radiance was overwhelming, a light that wasn't just seen but felt, warm, embracing, infinitely powerful yet profoundly gentle. And then he spoke. "You are here for a reason, Jessica." But before she could respond, before she could even begin to process what was happening, he lifted his hand. And in that moment, everything changed. She was about to witness something so shocking, so profound, that it would shake her very soul. The hidden truth revealed. Jessica stood frozen in the presence of Jesus, overwhelmed by the sheer power radiating from him. His gaze was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It wasn't just looking at her. It was looking through her, seeing every part of her soul, every thought, every experience, every doubt she had ever carried. And yet, there was no judgment, only understanding. Then, with a simple gesture of his hand, the world around them shifted. The tunnel of light, the warmth, the sense of peace, it all faded. In its place, a vast, open space appeared. It was neither heaven nor earth, but something in between, a place where divine truths were revealed. Before her, visions began to unfold, like moving paintings made of pure light and energy. She saw a world before time, a place of ancient wisdom, spiritual knowledge, and divine connection. The first image that appeared was of Africa, vast and illuminated in golden light. She saw great civilizations, people of profound spiritual power, communities thriving in harmony with God's creation. But then, the vision darkened. Jessica watched as the light began to dim, chains appeared, and an unspeakable sorrow settled over the land. She saw people being taken from their homes, stripped of their names, their culture, their history. She saw the forced removal of their connection to God, their spiritual gifts buried beneath centuries of suffering. And then, behind it all, she saw something even more shocking. A dark force working in the shadows, orchestrating it all. Jesus turned to her, his voice echoing with a power that shook her very spirit. The world has lied about them. Jessica's heart pounded as the vision continued. She saw centuries of manipulation, generations of people being told they were less than what they truly were. She saw history rewritten, their power erased, their true identity hidden. But then, the vision shifted once again. She saw people awakening, black men and women standing up, realizing who they truly were. The chains that had once bound them, not just physical chains but spiritual ones, began to break. Their connection to God, which had been buried but never destroyed, began to resurface. And as they remembered, the world itself started to change. Jesus looked at her once more. The time of revelation has begun. Jessica gasped, struggling to comprehend what she had just seen. This wasn't just history. This was prophecy, and it was unfolding before her very eyes. The spiritual battle unveiled. Jessica's mind raced as the vision faded. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a revelation. It was a warning. A battle had been waged for centuries, a battle not of flesh and blood but of spirit. And she had been shown the truth for a reason. Jesus raised his hand again, and suddenly, another vision unfolded before her eyes. This time, she saw two forces at war, one of divine light and the other of a dark, consuming shadow. The light was strong, powerful beyond measure, yet the shadow was relentless, working in secret, weaving lies, distorting history, and keeping people in spiritual chains. Then, she saw the root of it all. It wasn't just about oppression. It wasn't just about suffering. It was about keeping the world in ignorance, about hiding something that had been known since the beginning of time, that black people carried a divine wisdom, a spiritual gift, a connection to the Creator that had been feared and targeted for centuries. Jessica gasped as she saw historical events unfold before her eyes, empires rising and falling, rulers rewriting history, entire cultures being erased not just for power, but to suppress a deeper truth. She saw how the media, governments, even some religious institutions played a role in keeping this knowledge buried. The message had always been the same: keep them from knowing who they really are. Jesus turned to her, his expression both sorrowful and filled with unshakable resolve. If they knew, the world would change. Jessica could barely breathe. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. It was never about race. It was about spiritual identity. The enemy didn't fear skin color. The enemy feared power. The kind of power that comes from knowing the truth, the kind of power that awakens souls. Suddenly, she saw what was happening in the present day. People waking up. People searching for answers. People remembering. The same individuals who had been told they were worthless were beginning to reclaim their spiritual heritage, their connection to God. And as they did, the darkness grew desperate. Jessica saw the war intensifying. She saw attacks coming from unexpected places, through entertainment, through distractions, through fear. The forces of darkness weren't fighting with swords or guns. They were fighting with deception. They wanted people confused, divided, distracted. As long as people fought against each other, they would never fight the real enemy. Then Jesus spoke again, his voice filled with authority. The greatest battle is not coming. It is already here. Jessica's entire body trembled. She understood now. This was why she had been shown this vision. This was why she had to speak. This wasn't just history. This was prophecy. And the time to act was now. The suppression of truth. Why they had to keep this hidden. Jessica could still feel the weight of Jesus' words pressing on her heart. The greatest battle is not coming. It is already here. Those words echoed in her soul like a bell ringing through eternity. But one question burned in her mind. Why? Why had this truth been hidden for so long? As if reading her thoughts, Jesus lifted his hand once more, and a new vision unfolded. She saw ancient times, a world untouched by the lies of colonization, a time when spiritual knowledge flowed freely. There were people who walked in true divine power, those who could speak to the heavens without intermediaries, who understood the balance of nature, spirit, and the Creator. These weren't just isolated groups. They were civilizations, thriving in wisdom, in harmony, in a connection to God that most of the modern world had lost. But then, something changed. Jessica watched as powerful rulers, guided by something darker, sought to erase that knowledge. It wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about land. It was about control. They knew that as long as people remembered their divine connection, they could not be ruled. So, they rewrote history. They told false stories. They stripped entire nations of their identities. They took those who carried the knowledge of the heavens and enslaved them, not just physically, but spiritually. Jessica's heart ached as she saw centuries of deception unfold. The truth had to be hidden, because if black people ever realized who they truly were, they would lead the world into a new era of spiritual awakening. And that was what the enemy feared the most. She saw how history had been manipulated, how religions were twisted, how sacred texts were altered, how knowledge that once belonged to everyone became reserved for the few in power. The world had been built on a lie. And even now, in modern times, she saw how the deception continued. Through media, through education, through society itself. Everything was designed to keep people asleep. Jessica gasped as the vision revealed even more. Even some of the religious leaders, those who claimed to be shepherds of the faith, had been used as tools of suppression. Not all of them. Many were genuine seekers of God. But some had been placed in positions of power for one reason alone: to keep people from waking up. She saw how fear was used as a weapon. Fear of questioning. Fear of thinking for oneself. Fear of discovering the truth. And then, Jessica saw the real cost of the suppression. The lost potential. The millions of lives that had gone through this world without ever knowing who they truly were. The talents wasted. The power diminished. The souls who were robbed of their birthright. Tears filled her eyes. They were never meant to be oppressed, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow. They were meant to lead. Jessica could feel it now, the urgency of the message, the responsibility she had been given. This truth could no longer be hidden. The time of deception was over, and whether the world was ready or not, the awakening had already begun. The spiritual war, forces trying to keep this hidden. Jessica's heart pounded as she processed everything she had seen. The truth wasn't just buried. It was deliberately erased. And now, as it began to resurface, she could feel that something or someone was desperately trying to keep it hidden. Jesus turned to her, his expression both sorrowful and resolute. "The battle is not of flesh and blood," he said, "but of principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness." Ephesians 6 verse 12. The moment he spoke those words, a new vision unfolded before her. Jessica saw the invisible war that had been raging for centuries. At first, it looked like history: colonization, oppression, economic systems designed to suppress entire nations. But then she saw beyond that. She saw the forces behind it all. These weren't just men making evil decisions. They were being influenced by something far greater, something sinister. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She saw shadows moving through the corridors of power. Not human figures, but something else entirely. Dark entities, whispering into the ears of rulers, politicians, religious leaders, media moguls. They didn't just influence the past. They were still at work today. They feared the truth. Because once people woke up, once they realized who they truly were, they couldn't be controlled anymore. Jessica gasped as she saw how this war played out in modern times. It wasn't fought with swords or guns. It was fought with distraction, deception, and division. She saw how people were kept busy, entertained, and addicted, their minds too clouded to see what was right in front of them. She saw how fear was used as a weapon. Fear of speaking up, fear of standing out, fear of breaking away from the system. She saw how even churches had been infiltrated. Some, instead of guiding people closer to God, were keeping them in spiritual chains. Not all, but enough. And then she saw something even more terrifying. Every time someone came close to uncovering the truth, something tried to silence them. She saw historical figures who had been killed not just for political reasons, but because they were revealing too much. She saw entire civilizations wiped out to erase knowledge. She saw people in modern times, authors, speakers, researchers, who were dismissed as crazy, silenced, or mysteriously removed when they started exposing the truth. And then Jessica saw herself. She saw everything that had happened since she returned from her near-death experience in the deleted videos, the corrupted files, the shadows she had seen in her room that night. They were trying to stop her. A cold realization hit her. The war wasn't just out there. It had reached her doorstep. She turned to Jesus, her voice shaking. "Why me?" Jesus' gaze softened. "Because you were willing to listen." And in that moment she knew. She couldn't stop now. She couldn't let fear silence her. The world needed to know. This war was real, and it was happening right now. And whether people realized it or not, everyone was already part of it. The awakening. Breaking free from spiritual chains. Jessica felt a fire ignite within her. The battle was no longer something she was watching. It was something she was living. And now, she understood what Jesus had been trying to show her. It was time for people to wake up. She saw another vision, this time, of people breaking free from the spiritual chains that had held them for centuries. These weren't physical chains, but chains of deception, fear, and mental conditioning. They had been told lies about themselves for generations, and many had accepted those lies without question. She saw a man who had spent his entire life believing he was powerless, suddenly standing up, his eyes open for the first time. She saw a woman who had been conditioned to believe she was inferior, now realizing the truth about who she was, a child of God, created with divine purpose. She saw young people who had grown up believing life was only about survival, now understanding that they had a mission, a calling, a destiny far greater than they had ever imagined. As Jessica watched, she felt hope rising, but then she saw something else. The enemy wasn't giving up without a fight. For every person who woke up, there were forces working desperately to keep them asleep. She saw distractions being created. Entertainment designed to numb people's minds, false narratives pushed to the media, division sown between communities to keep them from coming together. She saw people who tried to speak the truth ridiculed, silenced, or even attacked. She saw fear being weaponized, fear of rejection, fear of standing alone, fear of losing everything. And yet, the awakening continued. Jessica saw people turning away from materialism and seeking deeper meaning. She saw families praying together again, communities coming together in faith, and people who had never believed in God suddenly feeling His presence in their lives. She saw Black people across the world reclaiming their lost spiritual knowledge, understanding that they were not forgotten, that their power had never truly been taken away. It had just been hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. And then, she saw a prophecy unfolding before her eyes, a vision of the future, a time when the spiritual chains would be broken completely. She saw a generation rising, leading a movement that would change the course of history. It wouldn't be about race or politics. It would be about truth, identity, and the restoration of divine purpose. She turned to Jesus, overwhelmed. Is this real? Will this really happen? Jesus smiled. It has already begun. Jessica felt tears streaming down her face. She understood now. This was bigger than her. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The awakening wasn't coming. It was already here. And the only question left was, would people have the courage to embrace it? This revelation changes everything. If what I saw is true, and I know it is, then we are living in a time of great awakening. But the question is, are you ready for it? Are you willing to open your eyes to the truth that has been hidden for centuries? I want to hear from you. What do you think about what Jesus revealed? Does this resonate with you? Have you ever felt like there was something deeper about your identity and purpose? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There's still so much to uncover, and you need to be part of this journey. Now, watch the next video on your screen. It reveals even more shocking truths that you need to know.